In this presentation, we will take a look at the Employees section of the home page within QuickBooks Pro 2019. For more accounting information and accounting courses, visit our website at accountinginstruction.info. Here we are on the home page. You can get to the home page by selecting the company dropdown and go into the home page. We currently also have the open windows open, which can be opened by going to the view tab or the view dropdown and selecting the open windows list. We will be looking at the navigation of the employees section on the home page. If you would like to just start entering data and start a new company file, you can skip to the section that starts with a number 6 within the videos to do so. Here we're going to be navigating around the system and seeing how the system is put together. The flowcharts provided by the homepage are a really good way to do that. Now focusing in on the employees section of the homepage. The employees section is going to be dealing with payroll, and payroll is going to be a type of system that's going to be complex in that there's a lot of different options for payroll. So when you consider payroll, you really want to talk to someone. You want to talk to someone that's independent about your payroll options, meaning you could get outside payroll from a company that would be outside of QuickBooks, or you can set it up within QuickBooks. If you're working with someone that you're going to pay for the payroll, then you may want to talk to someone else like a CPA or another accountant who you're paying hourly, because they're going to give you just opinions on what you need in terms of payroll rather than selling you the payroll and being paid through that payroll system. So it's one of those things that it's worth talking to someone who's not being paid through the payroll system that you're not hiring to run the payroll to get advice from, so that you get the payroll set up correctly and get the type of system that you need within it. So there's 3 types of payroll within QuickBooks. We'll talk more about that when we start to set up the system. But you can first do some research there by going to this turn on payroll, and that'll give you some payroll options within payroll. And then of course there's other options that you could do to have professional payroll services outside of the QuickBooks system to help run your payroll that we would then need to enter into the system in some way or another. If you set up any of these kind of turn on payroll items, then you will typically see 3 tabs down here, or 3 icons with this little link between them. If on the other hand you set up QuickBooks and you don't set up payroll, then you're just going to see something a little bit different. I think it'll have just the 2 icons. Within this practice problem, we set up the manual payroll within the system, which is great for practicing payroll. It looks much the same as any of the other kind of payroll systems when we go through the process of setting up payroll, but we have to actually manually calculate the withholdings for things like Social Security, Medicare, federal income tax withholdings. We'll talk more about that when we look through the payroll. Just be aware that you don't really want to calculate those every time, because that would be difficult to do. That's one of the services that just about any of the payroll packages will help to calculate, and it's worth looking at that. However, for a practice problem, it's great to do that because then we actually get to see what the system is doing. We're going to manually put in that information. So we'll do that at a later point. Right now, we're just going to look through the flow of this payroll information. Of course, the employees has the turn on payroll item here, which that's going to be kind of the sales of the payroll. The major payroll process will be the enter time, pay employees, and pay liabilities. This enter time item can be very useful for some companies, and some companies may not use the enter time item. If you enter the time here, it's kind of like you can think of it as punching in to a time clock. It'll track the time. It could track the time by employee within this section. The thing that's nice about that is it could track how much time is there for payroll. So if we pay people hourly, this then can be connected to the payroll, and we can start to populate the payroll that is owed. We can also calculate this if we have kind of a job cost system and we bill people based on the time. We can connect this to the invoice. Now, there's other types of systems to do that. However, we can have just a very simplified system where people are tracking their own time and turning in a timesheet at the end of the week or something like that, or other types of sophisticated software that helps us to track the time outside of QuickBooks as well. So this may be an option that some companies use. It's not required to run through the payroll. If this, of course, is going to be the major item within payroll where we pay employees. We'll talk more later about how to set up employees, how to get the employees in the system, and go through that process, how to set up payroll taxes once we start entering the data. But from a flowchart perspective, once that information is set up, we will go through the process of paying the employees and then pay the liabilities related to those payments. So this is going to be the major item we will have. If we select the pay employees, then it'll go through a system of the 2 employees that we have currently in this system. It'll have the pay periods that we'll have. And once we go through this process of processing the payroll, then it'll create the payroll checks. And the payroll checks is a pretty complex journal entry. It would be pretty simple if it wasn't for the withholdings and whatnot that are included in payroll. In other words, the most simple payroll journal entry, if we didn't have to do anything else, would just be a decrease in the checking account. We pay cash, and the other side would be payroll expense that we would pay the employee the payroll expense. It would be a very simple journal entry. But then, of course, we have to withhold some things with payroll taxes. So let's just take a look at the journal entry behind payroll, and we won't get into too much detail, and then we'll take a look more at it when we process the payroll in a future presentation. So if we close this back out, let's go to our familiar reports. We're going to go to the reports up top. We're going to go to the company and financial. We'll first go to the balance sheet. So we'll go to the balance sheet standard. And we're going to change the date range up in the customized reports. We'll change the date range to 01/01/19 to 12/31/19. January 1st, 2019 to December 31st, 2019, this being the period that we are working in. Okay. So normally the payroll would be decreasing cash. So we would expect some of the decreases in cash to be payroll checks. So as we enter that information there, if we double click the checking account, scrolling down, and we're looking for specific checks, it'll say check, but QuickBooks is nice to say, hey, this is a paycheck, not just a normal check, it's a paycheck. It's still a check. It's the same thing, but it's a paycheck. So if we double click on any of these paychecks, then this paycheck was driven by that process of us entering the payroll. This paycheck was created. Looks just like any other check, except it has a funny kind of a bottom piece down here. And if you want to see the detail of it, you go to the Paycheck Detail, and this is going to be the input screen for this particular employee. So when we pay the employees, this is what's going to be generated. He's a salary, and this is Adam. He's a salary employee. And this is how much he got paid. And then we took this from Adam, not because we get to keep it as the employer, but because we have to pay it to the state, or to the Fed in this case. That's the federal withholdings, federal tax withholdings we took from Adam for Adam's taxes, and then the Social Security and Medicare. And then so this is the net check. And then the other side, we have to pay payroll taxes of $258.66, Social Security and Medicare, over and above the earnings that we pay to Adam. So again, we'll talk more about that when we process the payroll. If we close this back out, we can see here what we have is just the net check that was decreased. So all we have is the net check that came out of the checking account. So even though Adam made more than that, that's all we have paid. If we close this back out, we'll also generate a liability, because everything that we took from the employees that we haven't yet paid, as well as our personal payroll taxes, will be put into this account, Payroll Liability. If we select Payroll Liability and double click on it, we'll see that these are payroll checks. Adam's an employee and Erica is our other employee. And it's being increased when we generate the check. So when we hit that same item, it not only decreased the checking account, but it also increased this payable account, representing the fact that we have now taken money basically from Adam and Erica's checks, and owe it to the government, and owe on top of that our portion of payroll taxes based on their wages. So we'll close this back out. The other side of it's going to be on the income statement or profit and loss. So if we go to reports, we go to the company and financial, we go to the profit and loss standard, change the dates from 01/01/19 to 12/31/19. That's January 1st, 2019 to December 31st, 2019, and refresh, or just click down here and it should do that for us. Then we see that the other side is going to go to the payroll expense. So here's payroll expense. So that's the other thing that's going to happen when we process the payroll. If we double click on the payroll expense, then we see once again Adam and Erica, and it's broken out. Now we see the gross check here. That's what we paid Adam. So if we double click on it and we select this Paycheck Detail, then that's the gross amount Adam earned, not the net amount we paid Adam. So that's the net amount. Closing this back out. This is the gross amount. So that's the gross amount we paid him, plus these two amounts are our Social Security and Medicare. So again, we'll talk more about that later, but all this is being generated when we process the payroll. So we're going to close this back out, and that's what's generated from this form. So if we go back to the home page, when we pay employees, basically all that is happening if the payroll is set up within the QuickBooks system. And that could be set up so it does it more automated. If we pay more, it's a separate service, or completely manually, which would be free here. And we set it up and entered the data, and we had to calculate how much was the federal income tax and the Social Security and the Medicare. Once that is set up, then we pay the liability. And so this is going to be after, because this we actually wrote a check to the employees, but we took from them what they owe for their Social Security, Medicare, and federal income tax and state taxes if they owe that as well. Then we pay the liability. So when we select this icon, it's going to go through this kind of widget screen, which will help us to make the payments for what is owed when we owe it. And we'll talk more about what type of different setups might be there in terms of when we have to pay the liability. But once we do so, the transaction will be pretty straightforward, because we'll go back to the balance sheet and think about it. We'll go to the balance sheet. We know that cash will then be paid. So the checking account will go down because we'll pay the liabilities with a check. So if we double click on that and we scroll down, you're going to have a liability check. So here's a liability check that we made to pay the liability. And again, it's just a check, but it went through their special little system, and they label it differently as a liability check. So if we double click on it, then it's still just a check here, but it went through as a liability check. So we're going to close this back out, close this back out. The other side of the check went to the payroll liabilities, which we owed. We accumulated those. Those were increased when we processed the payroll. If we double click on the payroll liabilities, then scroll down, we'll have these liability checks. Once again, that's going to be the other side. If we double click on one of those, it's still just a check, but now it went through that process of the liability check. And it has a separate tab here. So we'll talk more about that when we go through that process of creating these checks. I'm closing this out, going back to the home page. But that's going to be the normal flow. So this is optional. We'll enter the employees' information here, which will create the liability and decrease the cash and make the payroll expense, and then we'll pay the liabilities, not the employees. This isn't when we pay the employees, but it's when we pay the stuff we took from the employees and our payroll taxes. In other words, employee payroll taxes and our payroll taxes. And this is going to be some other added HR type of information that can be useful for any kind of system that is running payroll. HR standing for human resources. We can get some more documentation here that could be useful, because human resources is relation, or is a related area as payroll. So if we go here, we're going to get some more information, some of which will be sales from QuickBooks and QuickBooks provided items that would be useful to many people who are running payroll and having HR needs. For more accounting information and accounting courses, visit our website at accountinginstruction.info.